Okay, so just to summarize what we've seen so far, there's a lot of choosing to text and not to do IM, and I think it's because of this control factor. In fact, when I did the focus groups, I said, so tell me, why do you text rather than talk? Well, if I call someone, they're going to tell me what's going on in their life, and I don't want to listen. And I found this across cultures. There's a lot of pretending to talk or to fiddle with your phone to avoid communication. I thought these were supposed to be communication devices. The 3 words, there was an incredible amount of stress, addiction, chained, enslaved words coming up in a number of cultures that were sort of scary. There's this double-edged sword in terms of like most and like least, and reachability in particular. I don't think we're going to have time to talk in detail about multitasking, but what I'd like to do is just think a little bit about the notion of multitasking as a form of control. That is, I'm doing something, and maybe I'm doing 2 things or 3 things, and you're trying to talk with me, but I'm busy multitasking, and I'm controlling the amount of interaction I have with you by using one of these technologies. So, let me just sort of zip on through in terms of multitasking. I distinguish between what I call cognitive multitasking and social multitasking. By cognitive multitasking, I mean trying to do 2 mental tasks at the same time. It's what's in the standard psychological literature. So it may be seriatim tasks of you do a math problem and then you read a passage and then you go back to the math problem and so forth. And then there are the interruption issues of how much are you interrupted from what you're doing by hopping to something else. So you're working on a document, then you go check out a travel site, you return to the document. How long does it take you cognitively to get back to doing it? What I particularly studied was what I call social multitasking, that is trying to do more than one thing at a time, and what does that do to the interaction with the person with whom you are face to face. The literature on multitasking, the good news, there actually do seem to be some brain changes, maybe for the better, from people who are skilled at multitasking. There's the famous London taxi driver a study which showed a growth in the posterior hippocampus for people who were longtime taxi drivers. For anyone who's ever been in London, you know finding your way in London is a mess, and you have to get the knowledge before you may be a certified taxi driver, and that seems to have results on the brain. So maybe multitasking is something we can grow into. When I think about multitasking, I also think about such things as driving a car, which is multitasking. All you have to do is teach someone else to drive, and you say, now you have to look ahead, you have to look in the rear view mirror, and you have to look in the side mirror. And they say, how can you do those 3 things at the same time? We learned to do it, or else we couldn't operate those vehicles. But it is multitasking. Most of the literature on multitasking suggests, on cognitive multitasking, suggests poor performance in everything you're doing. There are studies that have been done by Hewlett-Packard that say your score falls if you're doing multitasking when you're trying to take an IQ test. Microsoft has done a lot of studies about how long it takes to get back to a task once you have been distracted from something else. Linda Stone talks about continuous partial attention, and the question is how much of your mind can you divide up if you're continually attending to multiple things. I did a study at American University on multitasking. I won't go through it except to say people do multitasking, but then when you do interviews with them and you say, so what do you think about it? This is now a social multitasking issue. They were doing IM because that's how I got the survey to them, and I said, so what else are you doing in your multitasking? They get very unhappy if they hear that you're talking with someone on the phone. If I'm talking with someone on the phone and I hear click, 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 meaning they're on the computer, that suggests I'm not that important to them. And similarly, when I asked in my mobile phone study, so tell me, if you're on the phone, sorry, if you're walking down the street with someone and your phone rings and you take it, what does the other person think? And they say, well, I'll tell you what I think. If it happens the other way around, I feel left out. If there are 3 or 4 people walking together, there are other people I can talk with, but if it's just me and this other person who's taking a call or doing a text, I feel left out. Okay. There's a recent study that I'm sure a number of you have seen that just came out in the news August 24th, done at Stanford, which surprised the authors of the study enormously, namely studying cognitive multitasking by college undergraduates and then asking, so do you do a lot of multitasking? And the answer is the people who did a lot of multitasking in their online and mobile life were worse at the psychological tests than the people who didn't do multitasking. maybe this is not so good for your brain after all. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the consequences of controlling a conversation, whether it's through deciding to text as opposed to IM, whether it's deciding that you can talk in someone else's presence on the phone. It legitimizes a mentality of social avoidance and social control. Now, this is a very difficult thing to measure. The press has been, talking an enormous amount about whether we're becoming antisocial because we now have these control mechanisms for the ways we interact with each other online and mobilely. But you talk with college students today, and you say, do you think you have a harder time, breaking the bad news? I think of breaking up on Facebook. You could do it face-to-face. Oh, no, I don't have to see you face-to-face. And a lot of them, particularly in the United States, who have been socialized to know how to interact with other people in a way that 20 or 30 years ago we didn't spend our time socializing people to do. They say, I just don't feel comfortable doing this face-to-face. That's a big study waiting to be done. Are we devaluing our interpersonal relationships if the person who's not here is more important than the person who is?